Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar, How to Simplify the Chaos of Scaling Work Instructions in a High-Mix Assembly Environment. I'll be guiding you through today. I'm Steve Wishau. I lead the product team at Pico. I am been around at Pico for about 4 years. My background is in manufacturing, operations, and engineering. Spent some time on the factory floor and operated in many of these environments that we're going to discuss today. But be going through some examples, getting into some demo here from some of our customers that are using this feature, and talk a little bit more about how we can really manage that chaos on the shop floor. So we've heard from our current customer base, there's some current challenges that keeping up with constant small changes across a lot of part numbers can be challenging. We do make sure operators are building using the most recent process versions or having that most up-to-date version of that work instructions. Similarly, as we're documenting that change control requirements for our customers, it can be really challenging based on the time, effort to really go through those instructions. Some of you are smaller companies with only a small number of process engineers, or troubleshooting those efficiencies can take time in managing those updates. So there's a lot of those time and resource considerations that go into play. Not just the high level of part numbers and making sure we're building with the right level of content along the way. So a lot of our content today is going to be talking about process variants, just to kind of give you a high level of what we'll be talking about from the Pico side. We want to manage those high mix product lines with a linked set of templates and variants. So essentially what we'll be going through is the standardization of here's this main part or product I'm building. This can be as simple as a specific process that's happening on one station. And we want to make sure we have everything linked together that we want to. So what I mean by that is when I make a change in one place, it's expected across all of those different variants, as well as keeping that uniqueness across. So if I have different scans, different part numbers, different torque requirements, it's all going to be there for us within our managed assembly here. So this will bring us to our first full question here, talking about how we want to manage our process variations here. So this is kind of an example of what sort of process variations and different types of structure do you have as part of your process. When we have our left-hand versus right-hand versions, similarly our revision A versus revision B assemblies, are we tracking those either mirrored or very similar changes? There's a lot of content that comes into those customer-specific, regulatory environments, or it's going to a different country. Different customers might have different colors, requirements, sizing, fastening, different part numbers that need to fit into their specific assemblies. We want to make sure we have that content available for us to walk through that information as needed. So just to look at the results of that quick poll here, it seems like we've got a lot and some interesting content for both revision A, revision B, and we'll be interested to hear about those different types of variations that you have as part of that process as well. So what we'll do first is hear from two of our customers about managing how they use process variants. We'll dive into their use cases a little bit and talk a little bit more about how that's all functioning.
Hi, my name is Greg Witt. I am a process improvement engineer. I work for Moride International.
Hi, I'm Chris Stewart. I'm the manufacturing engineer here at Poundton Machine Tool. And this is how I use Pico and the templates and the variants.
The variants feature is something that we utilize to control a lot of similar part numbers that all need an individual process.
Our main use with templates and variants is for differentiating between right-hand, left-hand parts. We use it for translation to have one set of work instructions in English, another set of work instructions in Spanish. And we also use it for shipping labels with having a primary template built, and then each variant is a different part number.
Hi, my name is Greg Witt.
So as we've seen from Greg here and Chris, we want to differentiate between some of those different parts. So if we're talking about a left-hand or right-hand part, we want to make sure that our labels are coming out the same, our serial numbers and part number are shared across those assemblies, and those processes are configured for those different orientations. Similarly, this is going to automatically generate those labels. This will generate that sequential serial number, again, sharing them or not sharing them as desired between those left-hand and right-hand numbers. But we have the ability to send that information to Zebra printers, so we have that correct part number, preventing those fat fingering typos, and make that label comes out as expected. That can either be, engraved, printed, scanned as needed, but we can make sure we're tracking across our entire family of products instead of just one category of part number. Greg at Moride has an option of being able to reorder his process steps, so that'll change the order of that operation to meet that assembly process for unique design requirements. So for those of you that might be doing different sizes and formats of your products, we have the ability to make sure that we're doing things in the correct order. So if something's a little bit bigger, larger, different format, for those specific requirements, we can make sure that the order of our assembly operations can be specific to the part numbers we're working on, depending on size, depending on format. Similarly, when we're talking about a very high mix number of parts, that spreadsheet's probably going to look pretty familiar with a bunch of different codes sitting on the back, and that's going to be ranging from a different series of bolts, retainers, and thread sizes. All of those requirements are small when they're all kind of separated into smaller chunks, but when you push those together, that's 5 to the 15th power of potential combinations of parts. So when we start to manage that mix of structure, it does get very challenging to update photos, update scans, update torques, and all of those requirements, and in managing that overlap where they are shared is extremely helpful. Too far, there we go. So finally, another example from Chris at Pollington here. We want to make sure we can leverage those translations as well. So when we're talking about, for example, a Spanish version of the work instructions, we can make sure the pictures, pass-fail scans, all those are linked. All of that inherent error proofing is in the processes, but we have the ability to, toggle between English, Spanish language of choosing to be able to communicate the technical set of those work instructions in a preferred language way and keep everything else linked. So you're really not managing multiple sets of work instructions for each language. We're essentially just doing a translation on the text for each variant version and managing from there. And of course, here we're also coupling that with the left-hand, right-hand version as well. So we can kind of mix and match our strategies for what we're trying to accomplish as part of our structure here. So to really highlight the successes of those process variants, when we have the high level structure of our content available for all of those processes down our assembly line and our workbenches, now we can manage that product workflow with that high mix of part numbers. So instead of relying on the operator to choose the right process, or in the case of work instructions that are on a binder on the shelf, and pulling down and paging to the right instructions, and trying to decipher my ERP job number, paging to the right work instructions and say, okay, I need this one, this one, this one, pull it out of the binder and pull it out, or use it as a reference. If I built that 10 times, we can start to build that structure and that logical flow. So it's this variant of the wheel assembly, these handlebars, these wheels, and this brake pad calibration when we're building this bike, to really simplify that process of this is my logical flow of all my operations and configuration options here. The configuration management within a ERP can be challenging. And this way we have that, that structure to be able to combine a lot of that content to support what we are trying to accomplish here. So we're going to get into the final poll question before I jump into a demo to start walking through the work instructions. We're curious, how often do you update those instructions? When we're walking through, when I am updating those configurations for left hand, right hand revisions, different size format, how often do I have to do that? Is that every day? Is that weekly? Is it monthly? Do I never have to do it? It's okay. We want to get just kind of a sense of what's that overall flow and structure of that content for supporting that work instruction change. So as you might expect, daily, weekly is right at the top of that course, and that monthly option is there too as we start tracking through the changes within our structure. So I will be hopping into the demo here to talk about how we can set up some of these variants and work instructions. So I have that example that we talked about a little bit in the presentation of how do we start managing these workflows to support our variant management structure. So we're actually going to be creating some variants here together to give you an idea of how much work goes into managing this structure, and also what are my options for that configuration management of everything coming through here. So I have this wheel attachment process here that is our standard version of our process. What I mean by that is this is a standalone process as part of my work instructions here. I have one version. This is the standard. This is where I'm putting on my front rear wheels of the bicycle. I want to scan my product serial number for my bicycle, which is, this is the frame. This is the identifier of the thing I'm actually working on. I want to record the traceable information of my wheels, so I know these sub-assemblies coming into this bike, which operator, what station, when were they built, which serial number, so I can track the overall traceability within my line, as well as fastening those wheels onto the bike itself, of course. So we want to make sure we are torquing to the right requirements using the transducerized torque tools available at our station, and making sure that we are torquing these down to the right value. So how do we create the process versions of this work instruction to be able to enable this? So I'm going to go through and make this a variant, which immediately creates a structure supporting a template and variant structure. So what I mean by that is I have my top level process, which is my wheel attachment process. Everything is going to link back to this template that's created. And what I'm going to do, because I think the answer that we received for some of the different versions of our variant is that we have different sizes for the process here. So for example, I might have one 24-inch wheel that is going onto this bike, and I might have a different size. I'm going to go back to my template here for an example here again. So within my workflow and my structure, I can create another variant and allow that to create a new variant here as well, which will be tied to that primary template that I previously created. And let's say this is, my beach cruiser mountain bike, for example. I need some really big tires on this thing to keep out of the stand. And I'm going to have this at a higher level. So from this point, how do we start managing those changes? So if I go into my template, for example, and I need to add a new step for attaching the front wheel, for example, I can certainly do so. Once I make a change to this template process, this change is going to propagate all the way through to my other variants. So as I can see that I created on this template structure, it is here for me on each of my variants. Very simply, let's say our beach cruiser bike here doesn't actually need that front wheel attached yet. We do that later on the line because it's a different kind of structure. For that bicycle, we can always exclude this from the variant. So what that means when I'm an operator building at this process and I'm going through my job and I surface my work instructions, I will only be building the rear steps 1 through 3 on this process compared to that top level assembly for my 24-inch bike, my 24-inch wheel, which will be doing all 4 steps. So we can just carte blanche say we are only doing 3 of the 4 steps. An alternative to that is if my standard, process, my standard structure is calling a torque tool. I'm going to go and highlight my step 3 here. In this case, I am fastening that rear wheel to the bike frame. The standard option is to do 2 bolts with a configuration ID. This is calling the job pset or program within that torque tool to fasten it properly. So if I go into my 24-inch bicycle, for example, I can go into my action and reconfigure my program that I'm selecting. So in this case, I'm calling job number 3. For the 24-inch wheel, I need to have a slightly tighter torque range or a higher or lower torque value. So here I'm going to be calling job 2. So what that does is call a deviation or an anomaly from that template that's saying, highlighting that this is indeed different from my top level structure, but I know that for my 24-inch wheel, I need to be calling a different job, and I'm going to highlight it here on that step. When I go through and make different changes on any of these processes, those callouts are going to happen on any step of the process. So if I go in here and modify this image, let's say I want to zoom in a little bit, or for some reason I want to rotate this image and zoom out just so it's a little bit more familiar with the operator as they're building on that step. I can do so. I can add, numbered bubbles, whatever I want to do to specifically call out the differences and variations on this specific part number or size. I can do that as well. If I change this text here and just say that I want to scan only the front wheel, those changes, again, are going to be listed here as part of that template, that I do have an image change, I do have an annotation change, and that's step description as well. At any point I want to get rid of these changes, I can always check that revert box and it goes back to that template. So really, we're just trying to manage that source of truth as it relates to, here is my top level, source of truth process, here's my standard procedure, and then on my part number basis, we can go through and manage that as well. This applies to the bill of materials that is on that bicycle. So let's go through and create a couple items here. That we need one front wheel assembly. And we're also going to want a rear wheel assembly. And let's just add in some bolts. We'll keep it really simple here for tracking our process quantity that we're using here. So we can assign these to the step that they're consumed on. So that front wheel subassembly, that rear wheel are going to be scanned in on that relevant process. And these bolts are going to be added in to that rear wheel process. I'm actually going to bump this up to 4. So we can put 2 parts here, 2 parts here. And now I don't have any unassigned parts. I can see that all of my materials are allocated appropriately for my process. This is likely going to already be in place from your, ERP, those work orders that gets transacted. This is just that reference for the operator, so I can see where are these parts being used in my process. So that 30-inch wheel that we talked about earlier about not having the bolts used on that process, we're already showing that because that wheel doesn't come into place here. So I can see that that process quantity is already updated, and then that bill of materials is live and showing that because I don't have any parts used on that step is allocated. I have the relevant bill of materials showing on my process already. If we go to the overall view here for the 24-inch wheel, I can see that, yep, I still have all my variations in place. When I walk through my bill of materials here, I can see that this process quantity is here. If I need to change that bill of materials part number here, I can do so and change my, part number, revision, whatever that may be. If I'm using a different rear wheel subassembly here on this 24-inch variant, I can also change that part number here. And these are just going to be additional things that are delinked from that template, and I can always go back and revert these later on again, just depending on where that structure is coming into play. So now that we've got a process variance built out here as part of our structure, I'm going to go back to my main process flow here to start configuring, how do I want to manage the process here within this bike. So right now I only have one subassembly here showing a variance. All of these processes could have their own, different part numbers and configurations. I've only got one for this particular process, but as we are tracking through our workflow, and for saying this is our, let's say this is the 27.5 enduro bike here that we're building, does need that larger wheel, I can select that from my process. So as I'm going through and building out my work instructions here, this overall content of the processes will be here for my top level structure. And I can see any bill of materials that are reflected as part of my product level here. I can be flagged for those notifications if something is matching, if there's something unassigned, and call out the specific variance within my workflow here. Save those changes to my flow here. So as we talk about, how do we start managing these to the production floor, a great way to do that is within our process configuration menu. So for every process variant, we have the option of managing our configuration appropriately. So if we need to name things or put a part number revision associated with it, we can certainly do that. So as an operator, as I'm building these, I can see the overall structure of my parts. So if I am saying I'm going to be building, I'll use some of the same nomenclature that I used before, that this is, subassembly, 10,008 that's coming in. When I am an operator at the station, I can select the part number that I'm working on by scanning this, by quickly identifying this part number, or when I receive that job number from the ERP, it'll be ordering a specific subassembly, a specific combination of these option codes to form my bicycle assembly. So really at any point, all of these fields can be configured to specifically match how these parts are being ordered and how the technicians and assemblers on the floor are selecting these jobs for production within their environment. All of these are individually configurable. Which stations can they be built at? As you can imagine, these can go to really anywhere in the factory floor, but we want to make sure that we have the ability to really track all of our changes, select it appropriately on a per operator basis, and be able to manage these directly as well. All of these variant changes are ported into our change control structure here. So when we talk about, who changed these, what timestamp do I know which variant, which structure was changed, I can send these through specific approval sequences to say that all of my processes, depending on whether it's part of that template, goes to that process owner or the engineer that's responsible for managing the work instructions, or I can send it through specific approval sequences. There's really no limit here. The most important thing is to say, I have the ability to track my process changes here throughout my work instructions. And they are, as soon as I commit these changes for approval, I can immediately see that here to deploy to the shop floor. As soon as I hit my submit button here, these changes instantly go out, and anytime an operator starts a new build, these changes will get picked up directly. And as I'm building on the shop floor, all those changes will go through automatically. So I'm going to toggle back to my presentation here and talk about where do we go from here. So we have a set of digital work instructions available. So at picomes.com/try for free, you can sign up for the basic version of those work instructions. These templates and variants that we walked through today are included in that basic plan. So we want to give you the ability to walk through those work instructions, create that interactive worker guidance, and collect those, that build data. It's all going to be associated at the template level. So it doesn't really matter if you have one variant or 100, all of that data is going to be in one central location for you to track your processes and the collected information from the shop floor. So please feel free to sign up for those digital work instructions. It's available on the link there. All of our training resources are available for a quick onboarding, available within a resource center on the product and at that link as well. And then there's going to be a link dropped in the chat here for catching us on our next webinar, which is how we can help close that loop between operations and finance for tracking the changes and improvements on the shop floor, and how can I start managing that structure a little bit better in handshaking between, the MES equivalents of the world and the ERP equivalents in the world. So with the last few minutes we have left here, I think we can go through some Q&A and jump into any questions, reflections that have come up over the course of this.
Hey, Steve, it's Shayna. We have a couple of questions that came in. First one, is there a limit to how many variants can be created off of a template process?
Yeah, great question. There is no limit to the number of templates or variants. I think the high level recommendation is keeping it in manageable chunks, and that's can be as many as 100 or so. But the overall structure of the variants, there's no limit. So if you have, to reference our bicycle example, if you have 150 different versions of tires that could go on that bicycle frame, they can all be associated with that structure. And to help manage that chaos as an operator, I don't need to try to select through 150 versions of the structure, the tires available to build. I can utilize scanning, part number identification to select that process for me.
Okay, great. We had one more come in. What are common pitfalls when managing lots of product variants, and how can templates help avoid them?
Yeah, great question. The overall structure of product variants is that never-ending rabbit hole of configuration management. So what I mean by that is when you do have 5 to the 15th power of options, it does get a little bit challenging and overwhelming. That usually the pitfall goes into a line in the sand of I'm never going to keep up with my instructions, so I'm going to have to keep it as high level as possible and basically say this is what you're supposed to do, but do this, this, and this instead. So the onus goes to the operator of figuring out how to do those things. Generally speaking, the operators are going to do a great job with the tools and resources they have available. But that's potentially an efficiency problem of trying to figure out, okay, this part number means this part number means that, and kind of that logic loop is going to slow down productivity and operations. Again, the operators, generally speaking, are going to be able to figure out there might be some shop floor controls to prevent, the wrong part going in. But if there's not, that's where that error handling comes into place of, parts go out to the wrong customer or goes to the end of the line and says, this isn't right. I've got to do a bunch of rework. So as we're managing that overall flow, it's important to be able to take bite-sized chunks here and go through the stuff we have available and managing that as well. So I think that's all the time we have for questions here. There will be a quick survey once the presentation ends here. We'd really appreciate your feedback on filling that out so we can keep making content that's interesting for you all. Thanks again for joining us. Appreciate the attendance today, and we look forward to seeing you next time.